Welcome to the WRAL Daily Download. I'm Jack Hagel. The dust is settling from election night. The state GOP got a stronger grip on the state legislature. They managed to take control of the state Supreme Court, and they held a key U.S. Senate seat. North Carolina Democrats, meanwhile, picked up key seats in Congress. WRAL state government reporter Travis Fain has been tracking all of it, and he's here to break it down. Travis, welcome.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Let's start with the legislature. Republicans were hoping to get supermajorities in the House and the Senate. Many thought they could, but they didn't. What happened?
Well, they came within one seat of doing it. They picked up that supermajority narrowly in the state Senate, and they fell one seat short in the House. But the way supermajorities work in North Carolina, so a supermajority, what is that? It's 3/5 of the legislature in North Carolina. It's enough to overturn the governor's veto without help from the other party. So Republicans could just totally control the legislative agenda. But it's not as simple as 3/5. It's actually 3/5 of members voting and present. What I'm saying here is that when you're one seat away from a supermajority in both chambers, attendance becomes real important, because if a couple of Democrats don't show up one day, they can move forward on things as long as there's a veto in the can. So as next year goes, as we get legislation passed and the governor vetoes it, keep an eye on those attendance rolls.
So with Cooper's veto power a lot weaker, what do GOP lawmakers need to do to get an override?
Yeah, well, what they'll try to do is what they've tried to do in the past. It just might be more effective because they need fewer Democrats to come along with them. So you entice Democrats by with the budget, for example. I mean, every year the legislature passes a $20 billion something budget. A lot of times you'll see little pork projects, as we call them, often local needed projects, but it's not hard to look county by county and say, boy, this lawmaker, their district got a $100 million fill in the blank. And boy, isn't it interesting that they then turned around and voted for a budget even though their party didn't. So you'll see stuff like that. There will also be really intense pressure on a handful of social issues. Issues that kind of pull fairly well, but Democrats are generally against. Like, for example, limiting how we talk about race or sexuality in schools. There's going to be a lot of pressure on a handful of Democrats in fairly conservative districts to go along with Republicans on those issues, and maybe the big one is abortion. There is one Democrat down in Scotland County, a man named Garland Pierce. He's a pastor. It's maybe not as simple as saying he's pro-life, because he has backed the governor when the governor has vetoed abortion legislation in the past. But when all of a sudden you're a Democrat who has voted at times for abortion restrictions, and there is a one-seat difference that could make the difference on abortion restrictions, I mean, just imagine the pressure that you're going to feel from both sides on that as Republicans try to get you on board for abortion restrictions, and Democrats say, nah, you got to stay home with us on this.
Has there been precedent with flipping lawmakers?
It happens from time to time. I mean, I have not seen an actual party shift. Well, I take that back. I've seen one lawmaker change parties over the last decade or so, at least one. And it's more on a case-by-case basis, though, where you can get so much of our politics boils down to partisanship, Republican versus Democrat. It, of course, is not that simple when you're living it day to day at the state legislature. People are voting their conscience on any number of issues. They are sticking with their party when they feel like they have to. But yeah, I mean, the budget is the biggest one that we see over the years, because again, how do you vote against X millions of dollars for a project your area needs, just to make a statement on the larger budget, whether that be over teacher salaries or total education funding, any number of issues?
Now, a lot of disputed Republican legislation has been challenged in the court. Oftentimes it ends up before the state Supreme Court. That might not be as reliable an avenue anymore for Democrats, right?
Yeah, that's right. So we're going from a 4-3 Supreme. First of all, we elect the state Supreme Court. They are partisan elections. Republicans returned those to partisan elections several years ago. It's been 4-3 for the Democrats. Now it's about to be 5-2 for the Republicans, because Republicans won every statewide race in North Carolina last night, or 2 nights ago when we're publishing this. They won the U.S. Senate. They won the 2 Supreme Court seats. They won the 4 Court of Appeal seats. And it's those 2 Supreme Court seats that are a really big deal, because most of what goes before the court is, you don't hear a ton about it, but when you do, it is often about power. It is often a lawsuit where either the executive branch, the governor, or the legislature is saying, hey, someone has overstepped. This is actually our power under the Constitution because, of course, the state Supreme Court decides constitutional issues. So education funding, abortion rights, any number of important appointments and just power over how government runs day to day. Those are the kind of things that have sparked cases in the past, will probably spark cases going forward. And the state Supreme Court, now controlled by Republicans, will probably have some different decisions than the state Supreme Court that has been controlled by Democrats had.
Let's take a quick break. When we come back, we'll talk about the gains both parties have made on the federal level. Welcome back to the WRAL Daily Download. We're talking with WRAL state government reporter Travis Fain about what this week's elections mean for the state. Travis, let's look at the federal picture. In Congress, Democrats fared better than people expected, right?
Yeah, they did. Although as we're sitting here recording this, it does look like Republicans won control of the House, probably narrow control of the House from Democrats. We don't know yet what the United States Senate looks like, but we didn't have that red wave that people talk about where just Democrats get wiped out. John Fetterman in Pennsylvania beat Dr. Oz. That's a flip. So a Democrat replaces a Republican in the United States Senate there. But Republican J.D. Vance won in Ohio. There are Senate races that are still kind of outstanding as we record this in Georgia, Wisconsin, Nevada, Arizona. They're close. They're split where a Republican is leading in two, a Democrat leading in the other two. So we'll see. I mean, we probably this could all end up getting decided to control the United States Senate by a runoff in Georgia because they have a rule where if you don't get over 50% of the vote, you don't win the race. You got to have a runoff. So that may be what it all comes down to because somebody's got to win two of those remaining 4 United States Senate seats to determine control of the Senate.
Now, in the state, there were a couple really interesting races, some that were closer than expected, some that went to Democrats that were maybe expected to go to Republicans. Tell us about those.
Yeah, I mean, the big one was the 13th congressional district here in the Triangle. That was the only real toss-up district. And I don't know. You would think in this environment that a Republican would do better there. Bo Hines was the Republican. He's in his 20s. He's running for the first time. He's running against Wiley Nickel, who was in the Obama administration. He's a current state senator. He won not handily, but he won by more than I think a lot of people expected. Hines really suffered, I think, from being seen as an outsider. He had moved around the state a good bit. He had just finished law school at Wake Forest in Winston-Salem. And then he moved into this district that's Johnston County, Harnett County, Wayne County, and Southern Wake. And I don't think that sat too well with a lot of Republican voters there. So they just didn't put him over the over the finish line there. And so now we're going to have a 7-7 delegation in North Carolina. Our members of the U.S. House will be 7 Democrats, 7 Republicans. It has been 8-5, so there's a little pickup for Democrats here in the state. But, of course, it's the national picture that is more important. Who has party control, who gets to name the Speaker of the House and control of committees and stuff like that in Congress.
Now, in the northeastern part of the state, retiring Congressman G.K. Butterfield, his seat was up for grabs as well. That race was a little bit closer than expected. Yeah,
that was a pretty heavy Democrat district. But just in this environment, Republicans, they didn't do as well as everybody expected. But look, it's a midterm. There's a Democrat in the White House, so Republicans are going to do fairly well, particularly with the economy, which I don't know the economy's that bad, but inflation is quite high. Enter Sandy Smith. She is, I think she would probably describe herself as an ultra MAGA Republican. She was endorsed by former President Donald Trump. She's pretty far right. And she was running as the Republican in northeastern North Carolina, which is kind of one of the few remaining really rural but also left-leaning districts in the state. One of the few areas that's like that. And Senator Don Davis was the Democrat, state senator, fairly moderate, has worked across the aisle with Republicans a number of times, has well respected. And we would have thought in a normal environment that's a walk for Davis. I think it's like a D plus 10 district, which means if you average election results across several elections, Democrats tend to win that district by about 10 percentage points. So, 55% of the vote they might get. But then we kind of saw late national Democrats spent $500,000 on that race. And of course, that's money that they could have used anywhere in the country, and they decided to use it in the first district up there in northeastern North Carolina. So that put everybody's radar up, and we thought, oh, they must be worried about Sandy Smith. Maybe they were, but it turned out that Davis won fairly handily, not as much as you would expect based on past election results, but he did put her away by quite a few percentage points. I don't remember it exactly. So, look, almost everything went to chalk in North Carolina. The races ended kind of as we expected them. I didn't really have a good beat on the Supreme Court races. That's a little tough to know how people can vote for judges. The only thing that really went a little bit haywire off of the expectation was the Bo Hines race in the 13th congressional. Wiley Nickel beat him by more than you would expect. But I think that had to do, like we talked about, with Bo Hines moving into the district and just not being the strongest candidate that could have been put forward in that race.
Now, in the Senate, Republicans retained a critical seat in North Carolina. That's the one that Senator Richard Burr is retiring from.
Yeah, Ted Budd ran strong there. I mean, he had over 50%. That doesn't always happen. He beat former Chief Justice of our state Supreme Court, Sherry Beasley. Budd outperformed Donald Trump. If you look at the percentage of the vote Donald Trump got in 2020, Ted Budd did better. He did better than Tom Tillis did in 2020. He did better, I believe, than Trump did in 2016, not as well as Richard Burr, who he's replacing, did in 2016. But so Ted Budd is a real success story for Republicans. I mean, he's a Trump-endorsed candidate, and I mean, he definitely embraced Trump, but he didn't do it in a manner where some of these other candidates in other states, where they just seem so far right that a lot of people couldn't stomach it, or not enough people could stomach it to vote for him. It'll be interesting to see how he governs. Does he become more of a Tom Tillis, where he's trying to work across the aisle on some issues? I mean, that's kind of a hallmark or it used to be a hallmark of the United States Senate. Or does he stay more where he campaigned, which was further to the right than that? It'd be interesting to watch his career. He's a Greensboro area member of Congress right now from Davie County.
Do you think he got some help from the Democrats as well?
Sherry Beasley struck me as a strong candidate, strong resume, but she never got the national support from Democrats that you saw in a Pennsylvania or a Wisconsin or a Georgia. And that was all about the math. The Democrats clearly thought that, because it's all about getting to 50 seats for Democrats in the United States Senate, because the vice president is a Democrat. She breaks ties. So that's control if you get 50 seats as a Democrat. So once they could get to 50 or even 51, everything else is gravy, and you don't spend money on gravy. So they didn't really pour money in here for Beasley. We didn't see a visit from Barack or Michelle Obama. That probably would have boosted turnout for Sherry Beasley. But, ultimately she lost by more than 3 points to Budd. That's not super surprising, maybe a little larger margin than I would have thought. But Democrats at the national level clearly were looking at the math and thinking, well, that money is better spent in other states where we have tighter races. Sorry, Sherry, you're Chuck Todd yesterday said that she had to do this on her own. Chuck Todd, the NBC political analyst, that she had to run on her own, that she didn't get a lot of money or help from Democrats. So I'm sure that there's some second guessing about that.
Well, Travis, I know you're going to be looking back on these races as well as looking forward to how the outcomes affect people's lives in the state. I appreciate your work. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me.
That's WRAL state government reporter Travis Fain. For the latest on WRAL's election coverage, visit the NC Capital section of WRAL.com. Thanks for listening to the WRAL Daily Download and for making us part of your morning routine. Another great way to get WRAL news is the Morning Briefing newsletter. You can find it in your inbox every morning with Triangle news, events, and headlines to get you ready for the day. Sign up at WRAL.com/newsletter.
Leave a comment and share this video with your friends. With daily uploads, there will always be a conversation.